Hello folks, I'm Pamela Young. This is Thrive 2030, brought to you by growthcurv. Today it's my great pleasure to welcome David Buffounge, who is the co-founder and executive director of an architecture and urban planning and design company from Hong Kong, Lead 8. David, how are you today?
Very well, thank you very much, Pamela.
Thanks for joining us. I know everybody's got a very busy agenda, so it's really nice to be able to break into your day for a conversation. David, I understand that you and a bunch of others formed Lead 8 in 2014 after working together in a previous life. I know that you've worked across Europe, Middle East and Asia in your career, and then you came to Hong Kong, set up Lead 8. Could you just, before we get underway on the questioning about the pandemic and the changes that you've seen in the world, would you like to take a moment to explain to us how Lead 8 came about and what your specialty is and what the nature of the work is that you do?
Well, thank you very much, Pamela. It's a fantastic being on this show, and I feel that it's an incredible time, how time has gone so fast. You know, Lead 8 is only 7 years old. We formed in 2014, and we've grown absolutely rapidly. We're now almost 250 people, with our main studio being in Hong Kong. We have a studio in Singapore and KL, and we've registered in London, and the idea is to sort of kick that starting in the next few months or maybe the next year. So there's a lot of things happening, which is quite exciting for us. We focus on a lot of mixed-use developments and transit-oriented designs. Most of our projects are about 1 million square foot up, and they're very retail-led mixed-use projects.
Mm-hmm. Some of the core projects, I think people will know, so perhaps you'd like to just quickly tell us about some of the key things you've been involved in. I know that you were involved in Changi Airport Terminal 4, Orchard Residences.
I know Orchard and the Orchard Residences.
Yes. Yes. People will know that one, won't they? What about Bangkok 1, I think is under construction?
Yes, one Bangkok is
Bangkok, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. That's one of the largest mixed-use developments in Bangkok at the moment, and perhaps one of the largest projects that we're doing currently is Sky City in Hong Kong. It's called 11 Skies, and it's by New World Development, and it's about 3.8 million square foot of mixed-use entertainment, dining. I mean, it's an incredible achievement for us to have managed to rapidly design a project so quickly, and it's already under construction and going to be, the first phase opens next year.
Fantastic. Just before we get underway, I'm going to change my setting and join you in Hong Kong, which is your beautiful city. And so that will just help us centre our conversation around where you are located in the world. So would you mind starting with a brief overview of how the pandemic changed your world at Lead 8? What were the changes that you had to adjust to over the last 18 months as a business?
Well, as architects and designers, we're sort of in the creativity business, and it's a very tactile industry where it's easier to work with colleagues and clients in person. So we've had to adjust to the whole online world of not being able to travel, and you know, the whole idea of being sort of super careful while we're moving around in the city and working with each other. At our studio, we wear masks all the time, except for when we're in separate rooms like I am now. But there are a lot of things that we had to do which were very, very different from the past. You know, the speed of our internet, the technology, we had to integrate new technology like SharePoint so that people who were working remotely could have a secure connection back to our studio. So there's quite a lot that has happened over the last few months.
It must be very challenging when you work in the creative arts like you do, because it does require you to take in the environment, smell the air, look at the colour scheme. I mean, really get a sense of the environment that you're designing for. How do you manage that when you're not able to get out to see clients so much?
Well, 80% of our projects are on mainland China. And one of the things we've found over the years is that the culture of this part of the world is being able to see people in person. So we've found that one of the big challenges, although Hong Kong has been relatively safe, one of the things, I should say that Hong Kong, unlike the rest of the world, hasn't actually experienced the sort of lockdowns that you've had in New Zealand and Australia and the US, etc. We've been quite lucky. The border's been managed very carefully, but we're sort of in a bubble. So we can't travel. Everything is online. All our meetings are online. We've made some adjustments in our studio so that we can have multiple meetings that happen at the same time. In fact, one of the things that I feel is that we've become actually more efficient, because I used to travel quite a lot, and I would sort of travel to a city which might take me a day or two to get to a meeting, which was only 2 hours, a 2-hour meeting. I mean, how unsustainable is that? And inefficient. So today we have set up our studio in such a way that we can have multiple meetings. And if you think about it, most meetings that you go to, you don't necessarily need to attend. You know, if we have 10 people in a meeting, you don't need to attend all of it. So we can sort of switch between meetings and cover more ground and cover more topics at the same time, you know, have more meetings with different clients and so forth. So it's been very, very useful. And, you know, it's having this experience.
Yes, I have heard from a couple of people that they've saved an awful lot of money in the last 12 months on travel. That's all converted to profit, which is nice. But very difficult when you're in a business where you're designing something which is so enormous and does require you to understand the landscape. So I can appreciate it must be quite a pivot for you to go from being able to look at the landscape that you're designing an environment, you know, for. I guess, are you doing it by camera, or are you getting locals to size things up for you?
Well, what we've done to solve that problem, over the last few months, we opened our first mainland China office in Shenzhen. So we now have a studio there, which is growing rapidly. And one of our co-founder partners, he's actually gone over for a few months, and he's been traveling around China, reconnecting with all our clients who are dying to see us, because you know, I think in this part of the world, people really want to see you. You know, we're doing a lot of projects for developers who really want to meet in person.
That's so interesting, David. Has there been a change in the client perspective? Are they requesting different things from you? Have they got different expectations now?
Absolutely. We find that our clients all have these new goals, new values. We call it sort of post-COVID thinking. And many of our projects have now integrated this sort of new era of what we call flexibility. And the word flexibility comes up in every meeting today. The fact that our buildings need to be able to accommodate change over time and be allowed for multiple uses. So typically, our buildings are mixed-use buildings. I'll show you this diagram if this helps. But we typically have a mixed-use project, which is a podium, which predominantly would be retail in the past. Okay. Then there's an office tower, and then there's a residential or hospitality component. So there's sort of this triangle of activities all work together as a whole. What we found now recently is that the retail part at the bottom of the building, the podium portion, has now become even more mixed use. So now we're integrating sort of education, flexible workspace, art galleries, museums, wellness into the bulk of the podium of the building. So there's a big change in terms of buildings that are mixed use, which is what we focus on, into multi-use buildings. So it's a bit like sort of single-use device to multi-use device. Our buildings are now becoming like that as well.
So if there are more museums and art galleries and things of that nature, is the suggestion that it's becoming more of a place to drag people along, since a lot of shopping centres have now lost business to online shopping? Is this the sort of alternative to try and pull people in? Absolutely.
Many of our projects, they're actually referred to as urban living rooms and mini cities, city campuses. You know, the nature of the description of our buildings have changed dramatically, and we're developing ideas around this concept of the third place. So you're not at home, you're not at work, you're sort of partly in mixed-use developments. Working, you know, your office, the coffee shop is now becoming the new office, as we always say. I mean, the coffee shop, if you think of it, 11 a.m. and the population of Generation Z that dominate a coffee shop in a big city, and all their Uberized businesses, the fact that this new generation don't have physical addresses, we find that the coffee shop is becoming the new office. So there are all these little changes that are happening throughout the industry with the new era of online taking place.
Yes. Now that model, David, if you just bring that back again, please, it shows there that the office block is the biggest piece, whereas your focus is on the retail podiums at the bottom. I'm wondering whether that is going to change. Is the office tower going to become smaller and the residential block going to become bigger because we're working from home?
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, I think what Hong Kong's experienced is very different from the rest of the world. And, you know, we're still working in the office. I mean, Hong Kong, perhaps maybe I should sort of say it's very different anyway, because Hong Kong typically has smaller homes. So the culture of working home has not sort of taken off as a very popular thing. People want to be in the office.
That's true.
And Hong Kong is and Hong Kong is also a very compact city, where it's you know, within 45 minutes you can get to your office. So it's not like some parts of the world where it's sort of an hour and 20-minute travel. So the convenience of the city, the compact nature, the fact that apartments are small, we believe that the office market will actually continue to thrive. Now, for the rest of the world, we strongly believe that the office component may change and accommodate other types of uses. So already existing in this part of the world is the Ginza sort of retail, where office spaces can actually become retail spaces or wellness spaces. And the convertibility of the building is super important. And that's why we put flexibility or future proofing is absolutely paramount when we're designing our buildings.
A week or two back, I was talking with Tata Consultancy Services. Their opinion was that 1/3 of jobs are going to be lost to automation, and they currently have 96% of their 500,000 staff working from home, which means there's a lot of empty offices around the world. I'm wondering whether we're under anticipating the expectation that people will come back to work, and for those cities that are going to have some empty office space, what is the likely conversion? I mean, do you think this is likely? And if so, will those buildings be converted to apartments, or what other use could you put them to?
Yeah, so there are many uses for office space, but we think that the office
warehousing, perhaps.
The whole storage industry has taken off, but I don't think logistics necessarily, or storage or warehouses. I actually strongly think that the amount of office space that we have out there is actually probably won't increase as rapidly, but the transformation to a sort of more flexible workspace may happen. You know, MICE, the sort of the concept of having meeting rooms and entertainment and flexible spaces within buildings is going to be very more popular.
So, okay, so you think that it's not going to be such a big adjustment?
No, I don't think so. think so. And there are new businesses that are created all the time. You know, it's very interesting how when one sort of industry ends, a new one arrives. And I always like to use the example of London, where you have the West End or Mayfair, and you have the City, you know, or Canary Wharf. Yes. And everyone felt that as Canary Wharf gets stronger, then what happens to Mayfair, the business industry? But what actually happens is the office market has many different categories. So City might have all the big banks, but Mayfair will have all the hedge funds, and today now all the crypto and cryptocurrency firms, etc. So places evolve. I mean, it's amazing how city ecosystems sort of evolve and adapt naturally to different uses or different typologies of space. So I personally don't think that there's going to be sort of the death of the office space at all. I think mixed use is always going to be there, but it's just going to transform slightly to different. It's just going to transform and evolve.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, I know that it takes many years to design a new concept like the one that you've shown us, a big mixed-use space or a new terminal for an airport or a new shopping centre. It takes years, doesn't it, to do the design work, and then, of course, you start preparing the land and the construction and so forth. It might be a 3 to 5 year journey. With the rapid pace of change with COVID, and also with, you know, time passing more quickly in every other regard with technology advancements, how do you manage when you're doing the planning, say this year or last year, for something that is not going to be completed in 5 years? How do you manage that transition?
You see, that's one of the challenges with technology, because when a building is built, if you think of the initial funding and the design process, the procurement, and then the construction, a building can actually take sometimes 10 years if you're in the West. In Asia, it's a lot faster. In China, it happens, 3 to 4 years. Yeah. But there's a lot of technology that is invented along the way. And if you think of Facebook was invented came on the market, I think it was 2006. Mm-hmm. There were buildings that were open, but they weren't designed to accommodate the sort of new era of social currency. And social currency is one of the new topics that is very important in real estate. I mean, what it discusses is really just saying that you can have two buildings that are practically identical, and one is with the same square footage, same height. They're in two cities that are very similar, but one building is more valuable than the other and it's nothing to do with the cost of the building. It's just the fact that this one has 1 billion likes on Facebook, or 1 million Instagram feeds, etc. So buildings now have to be designed to accommodate all of this new technology and the new way of thinking, social currency. There's so many things that are now very integral in the design of a building today.
Yes. Now, on that point of technology, what technologies are being used in new buildings is things like AI and machine learning and IoT. Are those starting to change the nature of what you're planning going forward?
Yes, yes. So the technology, AI, automation, robotics. We're seeing a lot of robotics in shops at the moment. So there's ice cream shops and that serve your ice cream using a robot. And I mean, I think it's also becoming quite popular because of hygiene. It's a more hygienic way to be served food by a robot versus a human. And also in China, who has embraced technology even more than any other part of the world. If you're in a hotel and you have food delivered, it comes by a robot. A robot comes down the corridor. So we're finding that. But this is we call this the sort of software of buildings. Yeah. We still think that it's very important to focus a lot on the hardware, and that's why the adaptability of a space is very, very important. So we're designing buildings that, like today, for example, we're designing one of our mixed-use towers, which is started off on the drawing board as a hotel, then it became a service apartment, then it became a residential, then the client wanted to convert it into co-living. So and they haven't even decided yet. So what we've done, we've actually done a footprint that can accommodate all of these changes over time. In 2 years, if we wanted to sort of retrofit, it is possible. So it's finding that floor plate, there's a floor plate in the design that can accommodate many, many changes over time. And, the touch of technology, I always like to say, if Sir Charles Darwin was an architect, he would probably say something like this. It's not the tallest buildings or the strongest or the smartest buildings that will survive. The buildings that will survive for tomorrow are the ones that are most adaptable to change. And it's creating places that are flexible, that can evolve over time. And that's also very, very sustainable.
Now, that's a really good point, because when I asked someone else the question about what will we do with this empty office space, can we convert it to apartments? And the answer was, no, we cannot, because there's not enough plumbing in an office block for easy conversion to apartments. So there you go. Not flexible, no plumbing, cannot be done. Understand. But one of the things that some of the other industries are doing, and this comes back to the point made by Tata last week, that 1/3 of office activities or work activities will be automated, which means that we're going to have to switch jobs, some of us, aren't we? Because 1/3 of us are going to be out of work. But what it is also doing in a lot of industries is putting pressure on people to minimise the human contact. For example, ports looking at, how do we find ways to, get the flow of goods around the world without having to stop because we've got a COVID breakout in a port somewhere. Airports, same thing. Any place where there's a large group of people, and sort of retail is one of those spaces. So I guess if you're not feeling urgent pressure from your clients right now to have more robots and more artificial intelligence doing things for them, I'm just wondering, whether you're expecting that to come on, that pressure to go.
Yes. So we believe in a hybrid, that there'll be a hybrid of places or real estate that will need to accommodate for robotics and automation. You mentioned Changi Airport earlier. One of the interesting things about Changi Airport Terminal 4, which is one project which I led the design for back at my previous firm, was that it was all about trying to integrate automation into airports. I mean, it was quite an interesting project, Terminal 4, because it was an old budget terminal that we converted into a boutique terminal. And the idea was to make it retail centric, make it people centric, and allow for natural light and air and ventilation and landscape and art and sculpture to be integrated into the building. But although there was a lot of automation, a lot of robotics and all the sort of latest airport technology, it was still about people. And for us as designers, we tend to sort of focus on the people-centric side of things rather than, you know, the bits that without people. I think it's important to make the building efficient, but it's important to also focus on humans. You know, the fact that these buildings are for our habitat.
Yes. I did learn through these conversations that Singapore Airport did open up its retail area when the country was locked down. When the borders were closed, but people were allowed to move around. So there were no planes, but the shopping area was open, which is, you know, a credit to your design of many years ago, which enabled that to happen because, you know, as you say, if it's a mixed use space, part of it can still be used.
So Changi Airport, I mean, is a fantastic group to work with, very forward thinking. And they're sort of developing these concepts of the airport city. And the airport city is now becoming another popular word, where the real estate at airports, if you think about it, it's a known fact that 60% of the revenue that comes from an airport doesn't come from docking planes. It actually comes from the retail, the commercial, and the sort of advertising, all the other things, all the commercial element. So Changi Airport realized that all of this real estate around their terminals could actually be converted into a little mini airport city. So at Changi Airport, there's hotels, there's office space, you know, a very sort of retail-centric environment, both on land side and air side. And it's made it into an incredible sort of travel hub. And many parts of the world are looking at that as a model for their sort of future airport developments. And it's quite interesting just working on projects in China and, you know, 80%, as I mentioned, our projects are in China. And many of our projects, they refer back to airport cities as the sort of direction. Because one of the things we're focusing on is transit or transport-oriented design developments that are over stations and rail and public transport.
Yes, I can see that that's going to become more and more, it'll be an area of greater development, won't it? Just coming back to retailing, with the push for online shopping, online service delivery of, you know, coffee and cake, just, you know, the whole digitalization of everything has ramped up over the last 18 months. How are the small retailers going to adapt? Because a lot of their customers will be shopping online. So what are they going to do to pivot, to innovate, to keep people coming to these shopping centres that you're building? Or
so very interestingly, that I remember 10 years ago when the whole topic on, you know, the retail centres and bricks and mortar and what's going to happen to all our retail shops in the future, because everyone was going online. And what's actually happened is actually the opposite. Because retail is quite easy for anyone to open an e-tail shop. You know, if you make a great product, you can set up a website, set up an online platform, and you can actually trade with no real estate. But it's now sort of made the world have more retailers because everyone can do it.
Yeah.
And if you take a small percentage of those millions of new shops and retail outlets, e-tail outlets that's come on board, some of them need physical space, but they just need smaller space. So what we're working on in many of our projects is this concept of co-retailing. And co-retailing works in a very similar way to sort of co-working, where, you know, co-education, co-living, where you share space. And the idea is that if you think of a traditional retail shop, imagine you had 4 or 5 retailers using that same space, curating their sort of merchandise, and using a sort of online checkout system, a bit like if you think of the Apple Store, the Apple Store concept, where when you purchase an item, you don't actually go to a checkout. Yeah. You look at an item, if you're interested in buying it, someone comes with an iPad and they check you out. So it's so the mixing with technology has allowed us to have this new platform of typologies of retail, which is very, very interesting to us. There's also a lot of co-branding happening at the moment, and I'm not sure if you've seen any of these, but I mean, I recently saw there was a North Face Gucci. There was I think Timberland and Jimmy Choo had joined together, and so they're retailers that are now joining together to do a sort of co-branded product. And we find that this collaboration is extremely interesting, and we think that's where retail will be going in the future. So you may walk into one of your favorite retail stores, and you might find there's a separate coffee shop there, but running by another brand. There's a chocolate shop, and they all curate a sort of experience within that single shop. And that's the sort of co-retailing, co-branding that we think is going to sort of change, which means there'll be more and more retailers out there. It's not the end of retail real estate.
Yeah, okay, I can see this happening. So what you're saying is, instead of wandering down the central corridor and having different stores for each brand, it'll be like a bigger space where the brands will cohabitate. So they will choose which one has the brand values that are similar. So it might be a clothing store with a technology store with a cafe or whatever, but each of them having similar values. And it might be green space. It might be a sustainability message or something.
So we call it sort of immersive retail, where you're sort of immersed in it. You're not sort of coming out of one store and going into another. Everything is all connected in a sort of very immersive way. We sometimes refer to retail without borders, because the shop partitions are now disappearing and everything is becoming sort of an open house type concept. So there's quite interesting things that are happening in the retail industry. It's not sort of the end. But we tend to, one thing I should point out is the word shopping center and shopping mall, those two words are very, very outdated words. And we tend to find that a lot of the new developments that we're doing don't actually refer to themselves as a shopping mall or shopping center. There are many new words that are coming up to describe these new mixed-use immersive developments.
Yes. On that note, David, the point about sustainability, the global push to get our carbon emissions down and improve our focus on, looking after our climate. What's happening in your sector? What are clients asking for in regard to making sure that their buildings and their spaces are more green? Because customers and tenants will be wanting to know that the building is meeting their objectives. Yes,
well, 20 years ago when I first came to Asia, I remember in our presentations to our clients when we were presenting our building designs, the slide about sustainability was sort of the last slide.
Yes, that's right.
Now it's come to the first slide on the page. And one of the reasons, there are a number of reasons for this. Some of it is post-COVID, which I'll come on to in a few minutes. But one of the main reasons is that to get as a developer, as an owner of real estate, to get a quality tenant, meaning if you're an office building and you want to get the grade A tenants, you have to be a sustainability certified building. So in Hong Kong, it's a LEED certified building, or depending on what part of the world you are. And it has to have that sustainable criteria. So there's a big push from all property owners to try and make their buildings more green so that they can get them certified, so that they can get these sort of tenants. So it's actually happened for a different reason, more than saving energy, etc. But now post-COVID, I think things are now changing. It's more than just about building a brand and trying to get the best tenants. Now it's about saving energy, and the whole climate crisis is also at the forefront of all the discussions with our clients and property owners, and it's very, very interesting. It's the idea to make sure that we create buildings that save energy. We're now trying to bring more nature into our buildings as well, So there's now green. There's topics like biophilia. In fact, we believe that the landscape architect will be replaced by the urban ecologist in the future. It's all about creating places that are green and environmentally friendly, natural ventilation, and it's not just an aesthetic on a facade. It's creating a building that is very responsible from a sustainability point of view.
So you just said natural ventilation. Are we going to see are we going to see the diminishing of air conditioning and for natural air to be flowing through this building?
So the interesting things in the projects that we do in China, there's regulations where you have to have open windows. So for example, the office building I'm in Hong Kong, which is a fairly, it's not an old office building, it's a fairly sort of newish office building, and we can't control the aircon. So today is a beautiful day outside. Yesterday was a little bit cooler, so the aircon hasn't adjusted itself. So, and in a way, that's very sort of unsustainable for me to be wearing a jacket because I'm a little bit chilly. When yesterday was, we should be able to make adjustments. So just open the window. So a lot of the new buildings that we're doing now have openable windows, and I think post-COVID, that's going to become a regulation in many parts of the world to allow for cross ventilation, which is what we need.
Yes.
Less reliance on the sort of air-conditioned vacuum sort of spaces that we currently occupy in our grade A buildings.
I do think we have had this conversation on Thrive 2030 earlier, where one or two people thought that open windows was absolutely going to be the way forward. And I think in order to get some staff back to work, that's going to be required, because, you know, people are very conscious now of how quickly they can catch things from other people. And, you know, the younger generation has you know, got a heightened awareness of hygiene, and their anxiety around, you know, the way the world has responded to the pandemic is also quite high. So I just think there's going to be a push from employees to make sure that the buildings that they have to come and work in are very green, do have good airflow, and not going to, you know, allow them to catch things off their colleagues and so forth.
Yes, and there's also cultural changes that are happening. I was interested to see all of these new sort of businesses that are being created. In fact, there's one recent one that I stumbled on, which is called netwalking, I think it's called. So it's instead of having a meeting indoors in a closed room environment, you go for walk. And this concept of netwalking and strolling around and having your meeting is a healthier way of meeting colleagues or meeting clients, and more environmentally friendly because you're just outdoors. So there are a lot of things. I think there's a cultural change happening as well, and this is sort of a very predominant post-COVID sort of trend that we're seeing.
Yes. Are you seeing other innovations in the property sector which are going to impact on your industry going forward?
Yes, well, the technology of the building materials, that's also changing. I mean, there's concepts of robotics that will help to build your building faster, because one of the problems that we found a lot in the world is that buildings, as I mentioned earlier, they take so long to build. And if you integrate technology that allows you to build your building quicker, then you can get your return. So as a developer, you're happier. And you can integrate some of the latest technology, the photovoltaic glass systems, the proper shading devices. There's kinetic facades now that transform depending on the time of the day to let in the amount of light that's needed and minimize heat gain. So there's a lot of technologies that are being designed to be integrated into our building systems that will certainly change the landscape in the future.
Yes, I'm just thinking, you made that point at the start, 80% of your new developments are in China. We know that there are some cities in China with quite horrendous smog challenges. I'm just wondering, most of that doesn't come from buildings. Obviously, it comes from coal plants and electricity, factories and roads and things like that. But is there anything that your sector can do to help with that air quality problem?
So at the top of China's the government's agenda is to solve this problem. The climate crisis is very, very important to sort of the world leaders, and China is sort of making lots of steps to help to solve this. I mean, one of the things I should remind you, when I first came to Asia 20 years ago, Hong Kong sort of sits at the sort of tip of the Pearl River Delta. And the whole of that region were all factories, and there was a lot of smog. And now all of that's gone. And that's gone because the factories have moved, and the factories have transformed to a different type of sort of output in terms of how they produce things. Yeah. And the whole region, the Pearl River Delta, which is now called the Greater Bay Areas, it's sort of the biggest construction site in the world. So Hong Kong sits sort of at the edge, or is part of the sort of Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Guangdong region, becoming part of the sort of new sort of metropolis. And there's a lot of new infrastructure that's being built, and a lot of attention to green. A lot of the cities have huge amounts of landscape. In fact, I understand that parts of Shenzhen, they employed expertise from Singapore Singapore is also famous for its landscape and its green in terms of the way the city sort of has evolved. So they've employed a lot of experts from Singapore to sort of advise on how to make the cities more greener. So the West Shenzhen, which is the Qinhui area, is an incredible place, which has a lot of buildings that take a lot of sustainable criteria. It's a city with it's walkable as well. It's very, very green, and it's evolving quite quickly. Yeah. So we think that, you may find eventually that China sort of overtakes the rest of the world in becoming one of the greenest countries in the world.
Wouldn't that be great? And why not? It's quite possible. The last thing I'd like to talk about is the rising mental health. Most industries and most organisations have said, yes, we had mental health issues before COVID. The challenge that we've put people through over the last 18 months has been enormous, and mental health issues are, of course, on the rise. We know that, after a decade or more ago, new buildings included atriums with internal cafes and shared working spaces and greenery and fresh air. So that was a bit of an effort to help provide a more natural environment for people to work and to start to deal with some of these issues. Where do you see it going in the future? What other developments can we make to help address this issue that we have about putting people through, this imbalance of work life? If we want them to come back to the office, what can we do in our building environments to help with that going forward?
Well, we strongly think more breakout space, more green spaces in our buildings. But it's not only just we touch a lot on sustainability, but there's also the psychology of a building. And in our projects, we try to integrate art and sculpture and nature and culture. We try to create mixed-use developments that have museum and art galleries. They're projects that we're doing where we're now bringing education, as I mentioned earlier, into buildings. So there might be a place, an urban living room, an area within the building that kids can come and do their homework so they can collaborate and meet. Because one of the problems that we've seen in the pandemic is the isolation of people. And that's actually one of the driving reasons why mental health has been such a problem, is people being isolated and not being able to interact. So we're trying to create places that are very people-centric and allow for people to sort of come together and interact. And I'm talking post-COVID. I mean, we're not too worried. We don't think people are going to separate too long. We think COVID is going to have another year or two. And then by 2030, I think it'll be forgotten. It'll be a bit of history that everyone remembers, but as a significant change to the world. But I think that we'll all be sort of interacting and collaborating and working together and meeting in the future as we had done in the past.
Yes, I think you're right. David, I'm just wondering about, for those owners of industrial plants or office spaces who don't have the luxury of redesigning everything, and your work is to design new buildings for going forward, but I'm just wondering, what advice would you give to people who own a space or who have a long-term rent on a space? It's post-COVID, they want to bring their people back, they want to do a bit of remodeling. What suggestions do you have for them? What should they be looking to do to try and improve their current environment so that they can provide a better outcome for their people over the next 5 years?
Well, if you go onto YouTube and you type in exactly what you said, there are loads and loads of things that you can do. I mean, I think a lot of real estate owners forget that sometimes it's the little things that matter. It's there are many things that you can do to a building just to improve its quality. But we've had office spaces where people bring their kids, they're finished school and they can meet at the office, and you create a place which is a little bit more relaxed than the traditional office. So, I mean, those are things that could actually be done. But
I have heard of some people allowing their pets in. People are bringing their dogs.
Yes. But then if someone has allergies, we were actually going to do that at our studio. When we first opened Lead 8, we were in a warehouse building before we moved here, and we were actually going to have a sort of studio pet. And then we discovered there were a few people with allergies. And
Look, David, it's been wonderful having this opportunity to talk with you, and you've got some great ideas, and it's refreshing because you're very positive about the future. So thanks so much for sharing that with us. Before I let you go, though, David, I'd like to ask you the final question, which is, if you were chief executive of the world at some stage in the future, what would be top of mind for you to address in your first 100 days? What's going to be your priority?
I think the priority is for people to talk. I think there are many parts of the world that have difficulties in sort of making decisions and different objectives. And I think the idea to get people to talk around a table in person, I think, is very important. So the top of my agenda would be to collaborate and talk about things and solve things through dialogue. Yes.
How would you get people to the table if they didn't want to come?
I think you can get people to the table. It's how they're invited. I think a lot of the process of inviting people to meet I think that needs to change. I think there's a lot of hostility in the way world leaders communicate. And I think the sort of politeness and the elegance of how you communicate and invite people to meet in the right place as well. It shouldn't necessarily be my country or your country. It might be a sort of middle country, which is more neutral. Yeah. So, and I think the collaborating and talking is very, very important, because that's how you solve it. I mean, most leaders of the world have common objectives, which is just to make their country a better place, make the world a better place, and have more trade and more collaboration. So, I think it can be solved through dialogue.
It's a good start, isn't it? Good place to start. And I think through talking, you do identify other people's anxieties and differences, and it helps to identify where you're not on the same page. So then you can start to move forward together
and understand cultures. Oh, yes. I think very, very important. I think a lot of the sort of conflicting discussions that you see between world leaders is just each leader doesn't understand enough of the other culture of that other part of the world. So I think understanding culture and dialogue and talking is hugely important.
Yes, that's true. David, thanks so much for your time today. It's been lovely having you on. This is David Buffounge from Lead 8 in Hong Kong. Thanks very much, David. See you soon.
Thank you so much, Pamela. Thank you very much. Thank you. See you.